Morning, bonjour, tansei, wache, bonjour, and hello. My name is Claire Woodbury, and I'm here on behalf of the Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society Manitoba Chapter. I'm pleased to welcome you today to today's webinar, Understanding the Value of Nature in the Hudson Bay Lowlands, in partnership with the International Institute for Sustainable Development. A couple of housekeeping points before we begin. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. It looks like a little speech bubble with a question mark in it. You can feel free to pop questions for our panelists into the Q&A function, and we'll try to answer them either as we go or at the end during our dedicated question and answer period. We also have a chat that looks like two kind of overlapping speech bubbles. That's where we'll be sharing important links or instructions for the webinar, so please keep an eye on this space. You can also use this to chat with your fellow attendees or the presenters. So everyone can do a little test now, find your little chat function, say where you're calling in from. For example, I just shared where I live and work. If you're not sure what territory or treaty you live under, you can check out these great websites, Whose Land or nativeland.ca. It's really cool because you can see the treaties, you can see territories, Indigenous communities, and learn a lot about the area. Here in Winnipeg, I'm calling in from our office. It's on Treaty 1 territory and the homeland of the Red River Métis. You can see this little X on the map is where our office is compared to the original Métis river lot system of 1874. We work here in Winnipeg and throughout the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Ininewek, Asininu, Dakota, and Dene peoples. CPAWS acknowledges that our water is sourced from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation, which is a community that actually had a drinking water advisory for 24 years. More than 1,200 hectares of First Nations ancestral land was expropriated, including a burial ground that was excavated, in order to make way for construction of the water intake for the aqueduct that still brings drinking water from Shoal Lake to the city of Winnipeg to this day. So I just mentioned that just to have a think on exploring where your hometown gets its water. Where do you get your electricity and other amenities that help run our lives here in the city? We're so pleased to have these amazing panelists here today to speak on the importance of the Hudson Bay Lowlands and all the benefits that nature provides us just by keeping it intact. In particular, we're going to explore this recently published publication, Manitoba's Hudson Bay Lowlands, Ecosystem Goods and Services Valuations. A huge welcome to Elder Flora Beardy, Ron Thiessen, and Marina Puzarova. A bit about our presenters. The International Institute for Sustainable Development, or IISD, is an independent think tank working to accelerate solutions to help people and the planet thrive. Here in Canada, the Natural Infrastructure for Water Solutions, or NEWS initiative, focuses on nature-based solutions to water infrastructure. You can actually use that QR code on the slide there, or a link in the chat to sign up for their newsletter to learn more about the publications and natural infrastructure-related news in Canada. Now, as I said, I'm here from CPAWS, the Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society. We're a nonprofit organization which advocates for the effective long-term protection of ecologically and culturally significant land, freshwater, and ocean areas in Canada. CPAWS Manitoba has helped establish 23 parks and protected areas in our province, which is an area larger than Lake Winnipeg. If you combine them all total together, it would be nearly 26,000 square kilometers. We've been a champion of the wilderness and parks in the province since 1991. We ensure the voice of conservation is heard on issues affecting our parks and wilderness areas. Working in a way that respects sovereignty and leadership of Indigenous nations, we achieve our mission through knowledge-based advocacy, public education and engagement, underpinned by collaboration and partnership. CPAWS is proud to be a supporter of the Kitaskeenan Kaweekanawaynitamuk Indigenous Protected Area Initiative, an incredible example of stewardships of lands and waters using traditional governance and following traditional laws and cultural values of the Kaweekanawaynitamuk. Here to open things in a good way is knowledge keeper Flora Beardy from York Factory First Nation, one of the partner nations leading this work. Flora is a knowledge keeper and York Factory First Nation community coordinator for Kitaskeenan Kaweekanawaynitamuk. Flora is an Inuiisku, an elder, mother, community champion, and historian. She holds an honorary doctorate from the University of Manitoba for her work documenting the oral history of the York Factory people, titled Voices from Hudson Bay, and has received awards of excellence from Canada Heritage and the National Treasury Board. Flora has recently come out of retirement to lead 5 Innu nations in protecting their shared homeland through the Kitaskeenan, Kaweekanawaynitamuk Protecting Our Shared Lands IPCA project. Welcome, Flora.
Good morning.
Feel free to open us up in a good way if you're comfortable now, Flora.
Right. Okay, good morning, everybody. I'll open with a prayer in Cree, and I have with me my Mikisu Miikwan, the eagle feather, which has been blessed. So now I'll open in Cree. And with Istamanto, Kinaskumitnan, Kottagisigaw Miniach, Kaweekanawaynitamuk, Tipiska. Kapagoseni Kaweechihiah Humagamaachitiach, Koiskapimotataya Humatuskewen, Kahkinawaynigiaya Tuskatahik Saweniminan, Sawenimigmina Kahkinawaya Hositchik, Egagapakichichik, Kahkinawagagiwatenmuchik, Unawestanemani Histawenesakihist, Kan Wichihigmina Oko Kaniganiskago Yakok. Una vez notatuskevenua. Misteto guabastenan, umakitaskimenan, ensuanaatistanwach. Ego annos guesiatuskatenan, caminostanwa huma, katemenopanekniganech, ugo egatesko gaintaugetzik, vistoagatiabatistanchik, emoyemesue suanaatistanwach. So when I'm nan kahkenawkes samantu koneanos ketesipogosen mit nan koichi hia koeska kiskenamaftahiach koneanos ketesipogosen mit nan kesamantu egose. Thank you. That is my prayer, giving thanks to Creator for everything that we have and to bless us all. Any project that we start, we always have a blessing ceremony, asking Creator to guide us through the project and ask that everything turns out good. We also ask to bless all the workers that are part of these projects. We ask for blessing on all our leadership, those that are not well, those that are sick, those that are homeless, those that do not have any food, and those that are suffering from wars across in other countries. But we ask for a blessing on this project.
Ekosani, Flora, thank you so much. Is there anything that you would like to say about the importance of this work and the work that you're doing?
Well, the work that we've been doing, the Kitaskeenan Kaweekanawaynitamuk, which means the land that we want to take care of, has been going on now for about 6 years. And it's taken a while for the 5 nations to actually get together to understand the project, make sure we know what it's all about. And that's been done by community engagements. We have community coordinators in each community with the 5 nations doing this work. So it took us a while to get the First Nations actually to trust each other again and respect each other, because that trust had been broken so many times over the years. But now we're ready to move on ahead more quickly than before. When we first started this project, we had a blessing ceremony, and the elders have told us to take our time in any project like this. It's very important you take your time. And I've said this so often, reiterating their words, that if you make a mistake, you might not be able to correct it. or if you can correct it, it's going to take a long time. So that's what we've been doing, taking our time, but now we've been getting more involved with other groups that have that we're sort of working together too with Oceans North, Audubon. And this is very, Kitaskeenan to us is very, very valuable. That's our homeland, the area that we're looking at in northeastern Manitoba. It's the homeland to the Five Nations that are working together. Our ancestors are from there. They've come from northern Ontario all the way up into northern Manitoba. And this land has sustained our people for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And we'd like to see that continue. It's unfortunate that we have seen some destruction happening in our homeland, but we'd like that to stop, and which is why we're working on it. We'd like something there for future generations to enjoy, and like our ancestors did, and like we have. We are known as the Kaweekanawaynitamuk, which means the keepers of the land. And our ancestors have done that over the years, for thousands of years. Keepers of the land, they've lived off the land, it sustained us, and we'd like to keep that going. And they did that by following their traditional laws. These laws or the teachings that we see today are the laws that they followed. And they never changed over the years. They stayed the same, which is why I believe everything worked so good, worked in harmony, because those laws didn't change. Today we see the laws change so often, and I think that causes a lot of conflict because you can't please everybody. But we are known as the keepers of the land, and with this Kitaskeenan Kaweekanawaynitamuk project, this is what we're looking at. We're starting to work at now gathering traditional laws, traditional information, and putting all that together because we would like to get back to using our laws when we get the land that we want to look after selected. Um, the trust is there now. I've seen that over the years. I've seen it with the gatherings we've had, how the people have come together, and they're really finding out who they're all related to, and we're finding out that we're all pretty well related, and that's good, and we're teaching the youth this as well as the elders. We are in the process of getting elders committee together and the youth committee because this work is going to carry on. It's going to take some time, and it'll be the youth that will be carrying on this work. But in the meantime, with our elders, they will be teaching the youth, and the youth will be learning from them. This land is very, very valuable to not only the Indigenous people, but to everything that's on Aski, on Earth, everything, all the creatures that Creator has blessed us with. If any of the chain or any of the strands in this web is broken, then the balance is off. And when balance is off, things happen that usually work that do not work in a good way. So with this Hudson Bay lowland, looking at our homelands, it's very, very important to us that we protect whatever we can. We can't only talk about the land, the rivers. We need to talk about the water, the air. The air that we breathe, that's what keeps us alive. I once asked an elder, what's the most important thing on this earth that you think is very important? And he said, Nakatamwen, the air that we breathe. If we don't have that, then we can't live. And then he went on to the water and then the food. So we have to protect all the animals on Earth. We have to protect all the fish in the water. We have to have clean water to drink. We got to look after that. And the air that we breathe. If that gets polluted, then we get sick. Was some of the answers that I got. So there's so many species of different things in the Hudson Bay lowlands that I've been looking at, and that is so important to look at. I've been going over some of these handouts that we were given, and when you look at the map of northeastern Manitoba, northern Ontario, and then you start talking about the peatlands, which is the big project today that they're talking about. That is the Nakatamu in the air that we breathe. And it's known as the breathing land, or the land that breathes, where the peatlands are. So maybe with that, I'll just stop there and let someone else. And if there's any questions or if there's anything I want to add, I'll add on later.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Flora. That really started us off in a good way as for the importance of this land and why we're looking into the value.
Mm-hmm.
If you have any questions for Flora, you can type them in the Q&A and we'll get to them at the end. So up next is Ron Thiessen, the inspiring executive director of CPAWS Manitoba, leading the team since 2006. He's my boss, so I'm legally obligated to say that he's inspiring. Ron has been instrumental in establishing parks and protected areas in Manitoba with CPAWS over these past 20 years, conserving nearly 3 million hectares of healthy land and waters for future generations. His leadership, together with the CPAWS team, has resulted in tens of thousands of letters to the provincial government from citizens in support of protecting wild spaces for nature in Manitoba. So Ron's going to outline the impetus for this report and why it is so important. Take it away, Ron.
Okay, thank you very much, Claire, and thank you so much, Flora. I'll just express my sincere gratitude as well. It's such a good way to start us off today and hear about the important work you're doing with Kitaskeenan and the 5 nations involved. We commissioned the report from IISD as part of our efforts to build the case for conservation in the Hudson Bay Lowlands region. Manitoba's portion of the Hudson Bay Lowlands is 67,000 square kilometers. That's nearly 10% of Manitoba's landmass. The lowlands stretch across Manitoba, Ontario, and Quebec, and it's one of the largest peatlands in the world. And it also contains the majority of Manitoba's 21 million hectares of peatland. That's, to put that in more of a context, that's an area around the size of Pakistan or just larger than the country of France. So it's a massive area. And these peatlands that stretch across the lowlands contain approximately 7 billion tons of carbon. And if it was released into the atmosphere, these emissions would be equivalent to almost 6 billion cars driving on the road for a single year. 6 billion cars, that's a lot. It's hard to wrap my mind around it. So keeping the carbon in the soil is a great way to prevent further acceleration of climate change. The region is also home to a diversity of iconic wildlife species, a vast array of wildlife, and Flora spoke nicely to that. And there's hundreds of birds that use the area as their year-long homes, as a critical rest stop on their long migrations. Also, in some cases, a safe place to raise their young. And the iconic species such as polar bears, caribou, moose, pardon me. And in spring, as the ice melts on Hudson Bay, hundreds of polar bears make their way to these lands to rest, to raise their cubs, and wait for the next hunting season. And in Manitoba, we actually have the most southern range of polar bear habitat on the planet. And the polar bears there are quite unique in the sense that they dig their dens in the dirt instead of the snow like other populations. And unfortunately, they are also at the greatest risk from climate change. Pregnant bears in the region already have to fast for up to 8 months a year, so twice as long as some of the more northern bears. And this is due to the early ice breakup on the bay. And then, once it's time to go back to the ice, the mums and the cubs have a long trek back to the sea ice where they can finally hunt for seals. Their inland denning areas can be as far as 150 kilometers from the coast, so it's quite a long walk. So the average bear actually loses about 1 kilogram of weight per day while they're on land waiting for the ice to form. So protecting this inland habitat in the Hudson Bay lowlands is critical to protect mothers and their cubs in this very vulnerable season. Very importantly, and Flora spoke to this just beautifully, is that we know the lowlands are important to the people that live there. They have an ancestral connection to the landscape. They know the land the best. And the Kitaskeenan team is doing very important work, and we're so happy to see that this work is being the core piece of the stewardship work in the region. We also know it has economic values, the Hudson Bay lowlands, for local communities, Manitoba, Canada, and the world. It's very important in terms of climate change, oxygen production, and many other values. And so this is, speaking of the economic values, this is why we commissioned IISD, or the International Institute for Sustainable Development, to explore the value of nature and cultures in the Hudson Bay lowlands in economic terms. And no one is more qualified than IISD to do this work. So we're very happy to work with them on this. This report attempts to put a price on the priceless and to translate the inherent value of nature into numerical terms for those people who are used to thinking in dollars and cents primarily. It's valuable, this report, because it brings forward economic reasons for why this area is so valuable to conserve. And these dollars and cents, these numbers are very important when negotiating with federal and provincial governments for conservation areas. And dollars and cents are very much top of mind for Crown governments. So it's important to put it in these terms for them as part of the conversation. In no way is this more valuable than the work that Kitaskeenan is doing. The ecological goods and services report and this information is more of a supportive rationale for why protection of the Hudson Bay lowlands is so important. Once again, Indigenous people have this historical connection to the land, pardon me. They know it best. And so by taking a leadership role in their territories like they're doing, they're achieving meaningful conservation outcomes and protecting a range of important cultural and societal benefits for the local communities. And further to say that investing in Indigenous-led conservation, such as Indigenous guardians and also in protected areas, provides jobs, strengthens communities, and ensures that stewardship traditions are carried forward. Looking at the Canadian and the Manitoba arena, Canada has made a commitment to protect 30% of its lands and waters by 2030. Manitoba, respectively, has made a commitment to protect 30% of Manitoba's lands and waters by 2030. And we're so happy to see that the primary force of doing that is Indigenous leadership in conservation, largely through establishment of Indigenous protected and conserved areas. Canada and Manitoba need Indigenous nations to meet their targets, and we're very happy this approach is going forward. So with that, I will hand the mic back over to Claire. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ron. And now to get into the real meat, the real good stuff, what you're all waiting for, we have Marina Puzerova from IISD. Marina is a senior policy advisor with an extensive background in economics and public policy. She specializes in investigating business cases for nature-based solutions for improved water outcomes and their co-benefits. She also works with Indigenous partners in Canada to expand understanding of value in policymaking and develop collaborative approaches to managing and protecting our waters. Now I will just let you take your slides over here. There you go. And Marina will share her slides.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm going to share with you about the methodology. So my name is Marina Puzirova. I'm the lead researcher of the report, and I'm going to walk you through the different parts of the research and explain how we estimated the economic values of this pristine region in its current state. So I also give some context on how the results of studies like this could be useful to highlight the importance of nature protection for our collective well-being, and how this particular particular ecosystem goods and services approach also fits within our broader context of different types of values and worldviews. So first of all, I want to acknowledge the entire team that's been involved in preparing this report. This effort took 2 teams from IISD, the Water and Resilience team, and with a collective effort to compile and structure this information. And the report we published in last June. So before going into the specifics about methodology and how we derive the values, I just wanted to provide some context and some reflection on how actually the decision-making process works with various levels of government. So specifically for decades, governments have often relied on cost-benefit analysis to help decide which projects or regulations should move forward. So for the federal level, for example, this practice is formalized in the Cabinet Directive on Regulation, and it requires departments to carry out a regulatory impact analysis. And the goal is to ensure that the regulations result in the greatest overall benefit to current and future generations of Canadians. One of the guiding principles is that the regulatory decisions should be evidence-based and include also a robust analysis of costs and benefits. So in practice, it means that the government agencies routinely assess the economic, social, environmental implications of various projects and policies, whether they, for example, establishing regulations for new marine protected areas, for example. But historically, unfortunately, nature and environmental benefits, ecosystem benefits have been systematically undervalued. So especially those values that are tied to keeping nature intact. So many natural assets, for example, wetlands that mitigate floods, or forests that store carbon, were not properly assessed for their long-term contribution to our well-being and economy. But this is changing, so this gap is more and more, of course, recognized and acknowledged. There are now frameworks that are being developed, such as UN's System of Environmental Economic Accounting, ecosystem accounting. It's a UN-adopted international statistical standard that measures, provides guidelines on how to measure the extent, the condition, and economic value of ecosystems and the services they provide. Many countries, including Canada, are already starting to implement some of the elements of that framework to track natural capital and inform their policies. At the local level, Canada's Natural Assets Initiative is helping decision makers in communities across Canada to measure also nature's contribution, and different municipalities across Canada are starting to integrate natural asset inventories into their decision making and assign dollar values to ecosystem services. So it's part of the planning and budgeting process alongside traditional infrastructure. So with this context in mind, it's important to assess the various ecosystem benefits that this huge, very significant area like Hudson Bay Lowlands in Manitoba provides. So what are some of those important previously undervalued economic, ecological, and cultural benefits of Hudson Bay Lowlands in Manitoba? So to provide some more background on this area, it's ancestral territory of the 5 nations, York-Factory First Nation, the Kitaskeenan Cree Nation, Fox Lake Cree Nation, War Lake First Nation, and Shamattawa First Nation, Treaty 5 adhesion land. The residential population is relatively small, approximately 2,000 people. And within the boundaries, there are a few settlements. There's Churchill, which is world-renowned for polar bear viewing, beluga whales and different adventure tourism activities. The area is largely pristine, intact. We estimate it's around 97.5% is intact, and it's part of one of the world's largest predominantly intact peatland system. 23% is protected under wildlife management area and national park designations. So in the image on the right side, you could see that the red shaded wildlife management areas are protected areas, and also the Wapusk National Park. Okay, so to be able to describe our approach, I just want to draw attention to this chart. It's from the System of Environmental Economic Accounting, Ecosystem Accounting, UN framework, and that's the statistical standard that I mentioned. This graph looks complicated, but in fact, it just shows you two basic principles of capturing the value of ecosystems. So you can record the value of stocks. So that's the long-term value of the ecosystem itself. So for example, we've estimated the value of carbon stored. But then you can also estimate the ecosystem services. So that's the flow of benefits to people and are recorded per year. For example, the value of carbon sequestered annually. And we can record those, of course, in physical units and also monetary units. So that's why the lighter blue and darker blue shade on the graph. So that differentiates between those two types of accounts. So in the physical unit, we can record, for example, 10,000 visitors and then 5 million in direct tourism spending to estimate our recreational value. But the recurrent challenge with estimating the monetary values of the ecosystem services is that many of the services are not traded in the markets. So it's difficult to evaluate the willingness to pay of the users of that particular ecosystem service. For example, the wetland can provide flood protection, but the benefiting communities are not paying for the service. It exists. So there's no direct price to reference, but definitely it has economic value. It definitely has a value for many other reasons. So there are a few methods for monetization that I want to touch on briefly. So, of course, there are directly observed values, for example, land rental prices for crop production, but the many are not observed. And there are certain methodologies to kind of tease out those values. For example, there's a revealed preference, different revealed preference methods, and you can observe behavior in related markets. A very common example is that hedonic pricing method. So it estimates the differential premium on property values or rental values that arise from the effect of an ecosystem characteristic nearby. So there's clean air provided by forests nearby or local parks, and it affects the property values. And from that, we can infer the value of a certain ecosystem characteristic. There are also cost-based approaches. For example, travel cost method, it's commonly used. So you can understand people's preference and values related to recreation based on the amount they spend to reach the site, maybe entrance fees, and also opportunity cost of their time spent traveling and visiting the site. Replacement cost methods, quite common. So it estimates the value of ecosystem service by calculating how much it would cost to replace that service with a man-made alternative. So if a wetland provides flood protection, the value is based on the cost of building the infrastructure to provide the same protection. But on the assumption that society would incur this cost if the service is no longer present. And the stated preference method is when you cannot find this values from related markets, you directly ask people how much they would be willing to pay for a particular service in the hypothetical scenarios, but framed as a realistic one. So there are no no biases. So in this slide, you can see some of those ecosystem goods and services that are applicable to Manitoba's Hudson Bay Lowlands. By no means that it's an exhaustive list. So these services are grouped in 3 categories. So that reflect the material contributions of ecosystems to people, for example, freshwater supply, medicinal plants, non-material contributions, cultural services such as spiritual connection, aesthetic values, existence values, tourism, recreation, improved mental health and well-being from visiting these areas, educational value, and also regulating and maintenance service values related to how ecosystems functioning regulates certain processes. For example, carbon sequestration is an important one, maintaining species habitat, regulating global climate, and those benefits are experienced by, of course, local residents, but those living far from it, which is important to take note of, such as global climate regulation, for example. So we were able to estimate the monetary values for some of those services, and those are highlighted in blue here. And I'm going to walk us through each methodology for each. So the tourism, we've estimated that the annual tourism value of the Manitoba Hudson Bay Lowlands is $45 million per year. So the region offers a wide range of tourism experiences. They could be sea kayaking, wilderness camping, some ecotourism adventures. Many people come to see polar bears, beluga whales. We inquired directly with some tourism operators in the Hudson Bay Lowlands to get the data on the revenues, but it was challenging to obtain that information that way. So the final number that we relied on was the value of direct annual expenditures related to tourism in Churchill, and that was from the Western Economic Diversification Canada. So of course we adjusted for inflation to reflect the value of the year 2024. But please take note that this value does not include the value of tourism outside Churchill due to our data limitations. This important value improved mental health from visitation is often overlooked, but very important contribution of nature to our well-being. To estimate this value, we've used the benefit transfer approach. So we transferred the values derived from another study that could be applicable to our context. So the study that had estimated that the visitors to 2 Australian national parks gain a certain portion of over the quality adjusted life years. It's the measure of additional years in perfect health. And assigning the value through the established methodology to one quality, we were able to assess the contribution of Hudson Bay Lowlands and Manitoba to mental well-being of visitors to the region for polar bear tourism. Again, not all the visitors. So that was a very, very important aspect to highlight. And the annual value we estimated is 93 million Canadian dollars per year. Biodiversity. So for this, we've gathered some original data through a survey conducted by Prop Research. They've surveyed 1,000 adults residing in Manitoba to ask them about their willingness to preserve Manitoba Hudson Bay Lowlands biodiversity. And they also asked for their willingness to pay to preserve it, which was an average Manitoban would consider giving 28 Canadian dollars per year, which we adjusted for inflation and kind of applied to the adult population in Manitoba, and which ultimately translated into the annual biodiversity value of approximately 34 million Canadian dollars per year. It's important to note that, of course, this figure reflects only Manitoba's contribution, and there's also, of course, the global significance of Hudson Bay Lowlands as a landscape and as a destination for tourism. So full conservation value is considerably higher. However, we did manage to find some way and some study to capture some of that global value related to biodiversity. There was a study conducted previously estimating the willingness to pay for protection of northern pintail's habitat in North America by households based in Canada, the United States, and Mexico. And the northern pintail is a migratory waterfowl species. It breeds in Canada, including in Manitoba's Hudson Bay Lowlands, and plays an important role in the wetland ecosystems. So again, the benefit transfer approach, there was willingness to pay estimated, and we've adjusted that willingness to pay by the proportion of pintail habitat in Manitoba's Hudson Bay Lowlands in the total northern pintail habitat area in Canada. However, important to note that this adjustment assumes that all habitat areas contribute equally to stabilizing the northern pintail population, but it doesn't account for difference in breeding pair density. So different breeding habitats can contribute differently to population. But overall, it gives us a pretty good idea of the value that is placed on this species by Canadian household, United States household, and the Mexican households. So in total is $74 million per year. And lastly, in terms of ecosystem goods and services, we estimate the value of caribou hunting. And caribou are the key species in the region. It contributes to subsistence and cultural practices, as well as economic activity through hunting. There was a study done previously, estimated the economic value of harvest from Beverly and Kaweekanawaynitamuk caribou herds in Manitoba. And similarly to the biodiversity, we've adjusted the harvest value for the entire herd by the overlap of the herd habitat with Manitoba's Hudson Bay Lowlands, which is around 6%, and arrived at the net annual value of caribou harvest in the region is at around 0.37 million Canadian dollars per year. Also, very, very critical service that this region provides is carbon storage. And this, just want to mention that we've evaluated the stock value. So it's not the annual service or annual benefit, it's the stock value of carbon that was already in the ground. Ducks Unlimited Canada National Boreal Program provided us with the estimates of the soil organic carbon. And it's a staggering 7 billion tons of soil organic carbon stored in this peatland ecosystem. And we've evaluated it using the social cost of GHG provided by the Environmental and Climate Change Canada. And the monetary value is a staggering 1.28 trillion Canadian dollars. So overall, the slides show this a summary of these values. So at a minimum, we were able to estimate that the Hudson Bay Lowlands in Manitoba provides around 250 million per year in the ecosystem goods and services. It's a snapshot of what their area currently provides based on the available data, and absolutely not the total value. But it's still helpful to uncover some of those different important economic values for communication purposes, like biodiversity and mental health service, and the value of carbon storage. So how can the results be used? the findings of these types of studies can be helpful in a variety of ways. So first of all, they can be used for communication advocacy, so it can communicate the values preserved through conservation action in the economic terms, the terms that could speak to decision makers. Second of all, through this process, we identified some, data gaps, limitations for certain ecosystem services, and there could be strategies put in place to address those gaps. For example, what's the value for global climate regulation, cultural value of habitat protection for Indigenous nations? So there could be improvements made.
1 minute.
This could also act as input in a cost-benefit analysis, and also help attract new sources of financing, because it helps understand different conservation outcomes, and can enable development of outcome-based financing structures for new beneficiaries of the health services of value, perhaps health departments or some other beneficiaries could be identified through that process, and the negotiations could be made to attract new sources of financing for this stewardship efforts. So just be mindful of time. We've also looked at some of the relational values in the report that you could read about. We've interviewed local residents and just trying to also capture some of the different types of value systems that exist. So it's not only the benefits of ecosystems that provide to us, but also we can live with, in, and as nature as well. So we wanted to give space to these relational values and interviewed the residents, and some quotes are presented here on the slide, just to show that importance of the Hudson Bay Lowlands for identity, collective well-being. There are different land-based programs that empower people and to find purpose, to share with others, and those things are very critical as well. So we wanted to make sure that they also can inform our decisions about protecting Hudson Bay Lowlands. Thank you for attention, and this brings me to the end of my talk, and if you'd like to get in touch, there's email on the slide. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Marina. I'm sure everyone has questions. There's already a few coming into the Q&A there, so keep those coming. We'll just bring it back around to Ron to kind of close us up with a sort of what next? Where do we go from here? What work is being done? Again, I'll share that QR code of where you can scan that to get the report, or the link is also in the chat. But if, Ron, you want to kind of bring it back to how are we taking the results from this, what's next, and so on.
Certainly, I'd be happy to. Thank you. Thanks very much for that, Marina. So at CPAWS, we're going to continue sharing the findings of the Ecological Goods and Services report that IISD has produced. We recognize that not everyone's going to read the full report. It requires a time investment, and certainly we encourage people to do that, but understanding that many people won't, we endeavor to break the report into bite-sized chunks that we can share the highlights of the report to people through social media and through other means like that to continue to engage Manitobans on the importance of the area, both locally and globally, for its significance for culture and nature and the economy. We're going to continue building public support for conservation in the region. As of now, through our efforts, we've managed to inspire over 33,000 Manitobans to ask governments to work to conserve the Hudson Bay Lowlands region. And just recently, in our work with the Kitaskeenan IPCA project and Flora, of course, at the helm, we'll be launching a new CPAWS public campaign aimed at inspiring Manitobans to issue their support directly for the Kitaskeenan IPCA project and the nations that are leading it. Thousands of postcards and emails from Manitobans will show the province, the Manitoba government, that they want to see their Kitaskeenan IPCA according to the direction of the 5 nations involved in the project. So that's really important to support their leadership in moving forward. We're also developing a species richness report to showcase the vast array of wildlife in the region, to put that in a very public-friendly friendly way and to inspire people to learn more and care about the area. We also produced some time ago with the National Audubon Society a birds report of the Hudson Bay Lowlands. So I encourage you to check that out. That's on our website at cpawsmb.org. And also on our website, we have a story map about the region, about its people and its wildlife, which is very educational and also entertaining at the same time. So I encourage everyone to look for that as well on our website, cpawsmb.org. And very importantly, most importantly, I think we'll continue to directly support the 5 nations leading the Kitaskeenan IPCA project. Indigenous-led conservation, in our view, is the right way to do conservation. They're the people that know the land the best in the Hudson Bay Lowlands region, and their efforts to protect and conserve the lands for not only local communities but for everyone on the planet it's a gift to the world. So thank you to Flora, thank you to Kitaskeenan for doing this very important work you're doing. I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you so much, Ron, and thank you to all of our presenters so far. Let's move into the question and answer period. So free to just unmute and we'll see who feels like answering which question. We already have a few questions here. I see a question from Nancy. Thanks for those interesting presentations from various perspectives. Could there be some risk involved in monetizing the value of these lowlands when so much of it seems to be of a non-monetary nature? Don't know if there's anyone who wants to jump into that question.
I can jump in. Yes, totally agree that there is a risk, especially if, because of the data limitations, we cannot monetize all the values, and especially the cultural values, spiritual values. It's something that is extremely hard to monetize. And if we only focus on what we can monetize, of course, we're going to miss out on so much. So I think there has to be a fine balance found. On the one hand, we want these types of conservation initiatives to compete with the other types of projects in a meaningful way, and that their economic contributions are understood within our current framework of decision making. But on the other hand, those other non-monetary values need to be still part of the discussion and the studies. And it's challenging because we are many people and we have different connections, and there's the components of reconciliation and justice and all these things, and being just out in the nature and having a kind of moral values also be guiding decision making. So it's a necessary step within our current framework. We can, of course, definitely improve on some of the data collection. We can continue monitoring and monitoring ecosystems and how they're doing and their conditions and collect data. But the social aspect of it and the human aspect of it should also be part of those discussions.
Yeah,
Thank you. Oh yeah, go ahead, Ron.
Thank you, Claire, and thank you, Marina. I'll just further add that I'll reiterate what I said earlier, that this report is an attempt to put a price on the priceless. So there's obviously, as Marina has noted several times, there's limitations in the data. There's limitations in being able to do that, in the sense that how do you put a value on an individual's connection to the land? It's akin to saying, like, what's the love of, you love your kids, what's that worth in dollar value? You can't put a number on that. It just doesn't make any sense. So these are sort of things that are above money, and those are important to remember. And an important part of our work, I think, is to continue to share these values that are above finance, above economics, and are absolutely critical to a healthy future for everyone.
Thank you so much. So our next question is for Flora. How do we offer support to communities or Indigenous groups leading this efforts in the creation of protected and conserved areas?
by joining our group. We have a website that you can go to, and if you're a different First Nation, we have a logo for the Kitaskeenan, and it's a picture of the land and the water. The land represents the land that we want to protect, our homeland, the water, of course. And there's a picture of a woman holding a baby. And there's also the sun with 5 arrows. The 5 arrows represent the 5 nations working together. The woman who is the water keeper of the water holding the baby, that baby is holding another arrow, and that arrow represents any other First Nation that wants to join our project, our initiative. You're very welcome to. And we'll just keep adding arrows as people join us. But that's by supporting us, I think, is the biggest way.
Thanks, Flora. I don't know if Ron, if you have anything to add to that.
Remind me of the question again.
The question was, how can people support the establishment of protected areas?
Well, I think it's really important to let decision makers know. I think it's important to reach out to Kitaskeenan directly, as Flora suggested, and share your support and what you can offer, and also letting Crown governments, the province in this particular case, know that you support the Kitaskeenan initiative. Know that you let them know that you support conservation goals and the need to protect lands and waters for nature, for culture, for our economies. And there's easy avenues to do that on our website at cpawsmb.org. We have letter writing tools that you can save yourself some time and do it in a more efficient manner rather than taking the time to break out the pen and paper to do it the old school way. So certainly, it's about letting our leaders know that we value the lands and waters that sustain us.
Thanks so much, Ron. So there was a great question in the chat function from Barbara, which is, what are you protecting the lowlands from? What is putting it at risk? I don't know if, Ron, you want to speak to that?
I can. Well, certainly there's quite an appetite for critical minerals for the green energy transition. And, certainly a green energy transition is important moving forward in the world if we want to reduce our impact to the environment. But at the same time, mining critical minerals comes at a cost as well. And we need to determine what areas are suitable for that and what areas are more appropriate for conservation. So certainly, so in the Hudson Bay lowlands, there is great interest in the critical minerals that are there. And also the peatlands that are there may be ripe for peat moss harvesting at some point in the future, not necessarily right now, but so to look at those important peatland complexes and to determine which ones that are absolutely essential to protect are very important, and shifting away from using peat moss for gardeners, for agriculture is very important in the sense there are alternatives available that people can use that are not climate concern for climate. So those are the two big ones right now. I would suggest that we need to keep an eye on, and just to make sure that nature, culture, and economy is balanced.
Thanks, Ron. The next question is for Marina, a little bit more technical, from Julia. I noticed a lot of the data points rely on a single survey or research point. Can you speak to whether there is a need for more surveys on willingness to pay or other research, or if you feel these data points are the most reliable sources of data? Secondly, given the tone of the current federal government, do you see more demand for this type of analysis?
So certainly there's some data limitation, especially people's values. I just want to note that the region is remote, it's large, but it's remote. The nuance about these types of ecosystem goods and services valuation, because the emphasis is placed on benefits of nature to the people, so they have to experience those benefits. either directly or indirectly. And because of very sparse population on compared to the overall size of the region, it's sometimes tricky to do and to understand those values. So we rely on essentially also the non-use values. Basically, people outside Hudson Bay Lowlands acknowledging that this region is worth protecting, and they feel strongly about the need to preserve biodiversity. So I would say that to articulate the importance of the conservation of these remote regions and large and very intact regions, it's very important to conduct some of the surveys of people, the communities living outside as well, and educate them also on the values. So I would say the fact that there was a study conducted on northern pintails, it helped us a lot gather those insights from outside Canada as well. So I would say they're valuable and as a valuable very for monetization and as a communication tool. I would say that kind of that should be the approach to gather this willingness to pay data from even like outside the region as well, because it will strengthen the case. And I would say that there's certain values that we cannot capture right now because we're kind of taking a place apart a little bit, but it's also one one unit that functions in its own balance and harmony. And looking into the future, there'll be less and less of those intact places, right? So right now, while there's still a few, they might not seem as valuable, but on the global scale, there are less and less of those places. The intact regions like Hudson Bay Lowlands will be more important, will be more valued, right? So thinking ahead as a leader, you're thinking, why not preserve something that will be even more valuable in the future? So I think we have to kind of have that lens as well.
Great. Our next question, which is for the whole panel, how do we justify keeping nature intact for economic reasons? We're saying nature provides economic benefits when there are other economic opportunities available. How do we balance development with protecting nature and culture in the region?
One effective tool is land use planning with local communities to determine what areas are to be set aside for conservation and what areas may be open for conversations and dialogue about development with governments and with financial investors, companies that extract from the land. So in a way, what Kitaskeenan is doing is sort of a land use planning exercise. They're looking at the areas that are valuable to protect for them and their communities and for nature and for culture, economy, their local economies. And so it's important to look at landscapes on a large scale level to determine that balance, because we will continue to extract critical minerals. There will be forestry, there will be peat moss harvesting, hydro developments, et cetera, in the future. And we need to make sure that we lessen the impact to the environment as much as possible.
Thanks, Ron. Flora, do you have anything to add to that?
I also would like to add that traditional knowledge, we're gathering a lot of traditional knowledge from our elders, and by working together, that will work, but you have to work together, yes, and especially with the governments. But traditional knowledge is very important there.
Thanks, Flora.
Yeah, I think that's really important going forward in everything that we do when it comes to lands and waters is, traditionally, well, I shouldn't say traditionally, but over the last several decades, there's been a real
I think we might have lost Ron there.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll let him jump back in. Maybe he'll give a question. Next question. What needs to happen here in Manitoba and in Canada to support sustainable financing for projects like this? I don't know if that's a question about this kind of ecosystem goods and services or conservation. But Marina, go ahead. Thanks. Hi, Ron. We're just moved to another question, but we'll get back to you after.
Sorry about that. My connection went out the window for a moment.
So, yeah, it's important to pull multiple sources of capital for conservation, for the land stewardship activities, philanthropy, government, private sector, perhaps carbon finance. I wanted to perhaps draw attention to how these types of studies could connect to some more innovative finance structures. We've done quite a bit of research and some analysis that are evaluating costs and benefits of different natural infrastructure projects and how they can help outcome-based financing. So in this efforts, you identify the service and the beneficiary. So for example, the beneficiary could be a downstream community benefiting from flood protection, or the beneficiary could be, maybe government and their health spending. If the people are healthier, and there's a fiscal case to, invest in these types of prevention, including the conservation. So I would say this exercise is very useful to identify those linkages, and this could serve as a first step in those outcome-based financing where the payments from the beneficiaries are tied to a certain outcome that an initiative provides. But that, I would say, is emerging field, and I would provide kind of just a partial funding for these efforts. Ron, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Thank you. Yeah, projects for permanence are becoming more widespread throughout the world, and often what that is looking at a protected area and determining how do you finance that protected area to properly continue to steward and to manage that landscape and to preserve it for everyone. So typically these are arrangements where crown governments contribute resources, the nations involved might contribute some resources, industry in the region might contribute some resources, as well as private philanthropy, so foundations that are focused on conservation. In many cases, what this results in is a trust for the nations involved in the protected area, and so money is put, a base amount is put into the trust, and that trust can grow over time. But basically, the dividends of the investment, the revenues from that every year are put into the operating expenses of protecting and managing that area. So this is a way to sustain local communities in protecting and managing the landscapes once again, for everyone.
All right, thanks, Ron. I think we have time for one last question from Catherine. With all the talk of opening up the port of Churchill, will increase economic benefit, and particularly concerning using icebreakers to free up Hudson Bay from ice year-round. What will this mean to the polar bears' need to hunt on the ice, and thus the impact on tourism if the polar bears decline as a tragic consequence?
What will this mean to the polar bears?
Anybody want to jump in for that one?
Well, it certainly will affect the polar bears. They are out on the ice and they hunt all winter until the ice breaks up. And now with this additional breaking up of ice, I just think it's going to be detrimental to them.
Yeah, I certainly share Florence's concern, and I think that's exactly right. And so, what with the all the proposals and the tens of millions of dollars being invested in Port of Churchill Plus, it's it's looking more and more like this is going to be an area where there's increased shipping, and that increased shipping poses threats to the local environment, local cultures. What's on the table right now to help address that is the federal government announced a proposal rather for a national marine conservation area in 2018. And the next step is to launch a feasibility study to have dialogue and consultations with local communities and stakeholders to see what the opportunity there is to balance nature, culture, and economy. So there's been some good news lately. The Manitoba government has recently issued its support to move ahead with the feasibility study for the National Marine Conservation Area. The town of Churchill is supportive, and sometime in the next few months, Parks Canada will be getting regional communities together to meet to discuss the opportunity of the feasibility study and to see what the support level is for that. And we at CPAWS really see this conversation, this dialogue that the feasibility assessment could provide as a way to determine how do we protect the wildlife, how do we protect the cultural values, how do we protect the local tourism industry, which is very dependent on the wildlife there. And so how do we balance all that out with the prospect of increased shipping? And so we encourage everyone to write your letters, let the governments know that this is a really important conversation to have.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, Ron. So I just wanted to thank everyone for attending. We've come to the end of our webinar. Thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you, Flora. Thank you, Marina. Thank you, Ron. You can check out these URLs here for the website. So there's been some pasted in the chat. You can also scan those QR codes if you're more savvy than I am. I can never get those things to work, but it's also in the chat as well. The recording will be sent out. I think it'll be available. Do our panelists have any final words to say before we leave?
I'd just like to thank you, Ron, Claire, Marina, for this opportunity. I want to thank all the leadership from the 5 nations, for the support that they've showed for this project. And thank you to the elders, the youth. Most of all, thank you to the team, the Kitaskeenan team. We have a wonderful team, and to our advisors. And also a big thank you to our funders, for Kitaskeenan. And thank you to Creator, who's taken us down this path. Egose.
Thank you very much. Ron and Marina, any last words?
It was amazing to be part of this work, to support Flora, the efforts you're leading, and to support the Kitaskeenan project. We've done previously similar research for the Sill River watershed, and very happy to support and highlight some of those overlooked values of nature.
I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. Thank you so much for spending the time with us to learn more about this. And I encourage you to explore the avenues that you have available to you to use your influence and support conservation work in the Hudson Bay Lowlands, and very important, the Kitaskeenan Indigenous Protected Area Initiative. Want to thank IISD for doing this very valuable work to help share and promote the values of the Hudson Bay Lowlands region. And most importantly, I want to thank Flora and the Kitaskeenan team and the 5 First Nations that are working to protect these lands and waters that are so important to local communities, Manitoba, Canada, and it truly is a gift to the world. Thank you, Flora.
Thank you very much, everyone. That ends our webinar. Don't forget to get your copy of the report and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Great.
Thank you, everyone.